Welcome to Water Level. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're focusing on the current water levels at Lake Powell and Lake Mead. These two reservoirs are among the most important in the region, and their daily measurements give us a clear picture of how they are holding up as we move deeper into the year. We'll walk through the latest numbers, compare them against past years, and follow the trends that have shaped 2025 so far. Lake Powell, as of September 23, 2025, measures 3,545.40 feet above mean sea level. That number might look like just another reading on the chart, but it carries weight when you consider its relationship to the full pool level of 3,700 feet. The difference is striking, more than 154 feet below maximum capacity. Day to day, the lake does not move dramatically. In fact, from yesterday to today, the level shifted by only 0.16 feet downward. Yet these small steps are like slow drips on a scale. They build up over time, shaping the overall trend of the year. If we trace back to January of 2025, Powell stood much higher, close to 3,570 feet. Through the winter and early spring, the line on the chart gently tilted downward, a reflection of seasonal patterns as inflows and outflows balanced against one another. When spring turned into summer, the decline briefly paused. Around July, the lake held steady, suggesting inflows from snowmelt or upstream flows temporarily balanced the drawdown. But as the hot months gave way to late summer, the downward slide resumed, bringing Powell into the mid-3540s where it sits today. Now, what makes this picture more interesting is not just the single number, but the context of past years. In 2024, Powell was stronger. That year's green line on the chart crested around 3,585 feet in late spring before sliding down again. The 2023 season was more dramatic. Levels began near 3,520 feet and then surged upward in a sharp spring rise, climbing nearly 70 feet to reach almost 3,590 feet by May. That peak, however, did not last, and the decline afterward was steep. The year 2022 stands out as one of the more troubling points in recent memory. During that season, Powell rarely climbed above 3,540 feet, spending much of its time in the lower range near 3,525 feet. It was a year of very limited strength, one of the shallowest in the sequence. Going back to 2021, the picture was somewhat better. The lake started higher than where it stands today, but the line tilted consistently downward as months went on. And if we roll back to 2020, the contrast is almost hard to believe. That year, the red line on the chart shows Powell comfortably between 3,590 and 3,610 feet, even cresting above that at certain points. In short, Powell in 2020 carried far more volume and stability than we see in 2025. When we line up all of these years, a pattern emerges. The story of Powell is not just about one year's decline, but how each year stacks up. 2025 began in a stronger position than 2022 and 2023, avoiding their lowest depths. Yet by September, the cushion has narrowed, and Powell now sits in a zone that no longer feels especially secure. Now let's shift focus to Lake Mead, the second half of this picture. On September 25, 2025, at 10 in the morning, Mead stood at 1,056.69 feet above mean sea level. Its full pool, at 1,229 feet, shows just how far the reservoir sits from capacity, more than 172 feet down. From yesterday to today, the change is barely noticeable, a decline of only 0.01 feet. But as with Powell, it's not about the daily wiggle, it's about the longer arc of the year. At the start of 2025, Mead was sitting stronger, near 1,065 feet. Through late winter and into spring, the line bent upward a bit, showing a modest seasonal gain. By early summer, the reservoir hovered comfortably in the 1,060 to 1,065 foot range. Since then, the lake has shown resilience, holding steady between 1,055 and 1,060 feet as September unfolds. Compared to Powell's sharper drops, Mead has charted a flatter, more stable line in recent months. Looking across years, the story of Mead has its own rhythm. In 2024, Mead surged to around 1,075 feet by spring before sliding down again. In 2023, the rise was more dramatic, beginning near 1,045 feet and shooting up to about 1,070 feet by early summer, a gain of nearly 25 feet in just a few months. The year 2022, much like Powell, shows one of the weakest stretches of the last half-decade. Mead hovered between 1,030 and 1,045 feet, making it one of the most constrained periods of the last half-decade. The year 2021 paints a better picture, with levels holding closer to 1,080 feet, while 2020 was by far the strongest of the recent years, keeping water consistently above 1,090 feet and even climbing past 1,105 feet at its seasonal high. This year, 2025, leaves Mead somewhere in the middle of that historical spread. It is far better than 2022, which hovered near record lows, but it does not touch the stronger elevations of 2020 and 2021. Instead, it parallels 2024 in many ways, running just a little lower at times, but not far off from last year's path. Now, if we step back and view Powell and Mead together, the contrast is important. Powell, at 3,545 feet, shows a sharper downward slope in the late summer, while Mead, at 1,056 feet, holds steady on a plateau. Both are well below full capacity, but the pace of change differs. Powell seems more volatile, experiencing bigger seasonal swings and steeper recent drops. Mead has been steadier this year, holding its line in a narrower band, though at a level still far below historical highs. Together, these two reservoirs reflect the ebb and flow of the river system that feeds them. Daily changes of a few hundredths of a foot may seem minor, but over weeks, those changes become several feet, and over months, they can reshape the curve of the year entirely. Powell's daily drop of 0.16 feet may look small on paper, but strung together across weeks, it quickly builds up to several feet lost. Mead's steadier pattern of nearly flat daily changes, by contrast, is what has allowed it to maintain its position above 1,055 feet for much of late summer. As we close in on the end of September 2025, the takeaway is this. Powell has slipped into the 3,540 range, showing signs of continued decline, while Mead has steadied around 1,056 feet. Powell looks weaker than it did in spring and weaker than in 2024, though not still at the lows of 2022. Mead looks like it is holding its ground, roughly matching 2024 and standing stronger than 2022, though still far below the highs of 5 years ago. The numbers tell a story that words alone cannot. On one side, Powell is hundreds of feet from full pool, resting in the mid-3,500s. On the other, Mead sits more than 172 feet below capacity, plateaued near 1,056 feet. Both reservoirs show how seasonal cycles, upstream and downstream flows, and the balance between inflows and releases combine into year-to-year rhythms. These graphs make clear that while the short-term changes may look small, the long arcs are what matter. So, as of late September 2025, we mark Powell at 3,545.40 feet and Mead at 1,056.69 feet. Each day brings tiny adjustments, but together those adjustments shape the state of the system. Looking at the past 5 years, both reservoirs have lived through sharp rises, steep declines, and long periods of stability. This year places them squarely in the middle. Not the best, not the worst, but a reminder that every foot counts when we track the progress of these massive bodies of water. That wraps up our update on the water levels of Lake Powell and Lake Mead as of late September 2025. Lake Powell is holding at just over 3,545 feet, while Lake Mead remains steady near 1,056 feet. Both are far from full capacity, but each shows its own pattern when compared to the last several years. Thanks for joining me for this review, and if you'd like to stay on top of future changes, be sure to follow along for the next update.